Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, November the 18th, 2024. So today there is an opposition aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. And this aspect is something I want to look at in detail. I'm pretty sure, is the most important aspect of the day. And I want to look at it in terms of what it might mean for us, what it might mean in terms of particular people, and in general, what it means to have Mercury opposition Jupiter in the horoscope. But before I look at Mercury opposition Jupiter in detail, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, November the 18th. Usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very happy if you were to like it, and I'd be even happier if you're not subscribed if you were to subscribe, because it doesn't cost you anything, but it does make a difference to the channel. So let's start by looking at what's happening today. So as usual, here is the positions of the planets, noon, November the 18th, 2024. Set for New York. So as far as the moon is concerned, New York at noon today, we have the moon at 4 degrees 46 Cancer. So moon in Cancer, that is a nice place for the moon to be. The moon rules Cancer, and obviously Cancer is a water sign, so we've got the moon in Cancer and the sun in Scorpio. So with both the sun and the moon in water signs, it's perhaps a day when the emotional side of things might be emphasized. Of course, the moon isn't just in Cancer today, it's in the moon will be in Cancer tomorrow as well. So it might be a time to sort of perhaps tune into our feelings. There's nothing wrong with being emotional, and it's all very well to have ideas and to have thoughts, but they kind of have to be backed up to an extent by our feelings. And of course, we have just had the moon moving through sort of late Gemini, so we had the moon and Jupiter in Gemini, so we had a bit of a Gemini emphasis, but now that's changed. And so the moon in Cancer, well, as far as when it moves into Cancer London time, 8:50 a.m. So if you're in Europe, then okay, the very first part of the day the moon is actually in Gemini, but by the mid-morning it'll be out. So if you're in Paris or Berlin, for example, the moon will move into Cancer at sort of 9:50 a.m. So broadly speaking, if you're in the Americas, Europe, Africa, then you can pretty much regard it as being a moon in Cancer kind of day. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon won't move into Cancer until this evening. So for much of a day, the moon will be in Gemini. So the moon moving through Cancer does make an opposition aspect to Venus. Moon in Cancer opposition Venus in Capricorn. Now, that aspect, it can be a little bit difficult. When you've got two fairly emotional planets like Moon and Venus in opposition to each other, one can be tempted to sort of take things a little bit too far. Though maybe we have to consider sign position. Venus in Capricorn plays Moon in Cancer. Bit of a difference of emphasis there. Venus is about aesthetics, it's about balance. And so perhaps Venus in Capricorn doesn't necessarily approve of overt displays of emotion. So yes, we are emotional. Some of us are emotional. But with Moon opposition Venus, it might get to be too much of a good thing. Venus in Capricorn has its limits. You could say has its standards. And sort of sloppy emotion over sentimentality, but may sometimes be associated with moon in Cancer, might not be appreciated. Now, aside from that, well, actually just before the moon moves into Cancer, the moon makes a square to Neptune. So Neptune is at 27 Pisces. Now that moon square Neptune, probably more of a feature if you're in East Asia, Australia or New Zealand. Moon square Neptune, sort of, there might be a sense of confusion, talking too much, and saying things without actually considering the emotional environment. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment when I look at the chart set for Sydney, Australia. But and perhaps, in fact, almost certainly, the main aspect taking place today is an aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. So Mercury is at 1905. Well, as you can see at noon today, Mercury is at 19 Gemini. But in fact, Mercury and Jupiter, Mercury is at 19 Gemini. Mercury is at 19 Sagittarius. Jupiter's at 19 Gemini. So Mercury opposition Jupiter. So Mercury is about the way we think. It can be about the way we talk. Jupiter can be the planet of excess. So you put Mercury and Jupiter together, and you could get a lot of talking. And there could be a sense of excitement there. Can be overexcitement, Mercury opposition Jupiter. We may, at least with our mind, sort of take things too far. Although actually there's some evidence, and I'll be looking at Mercury opposition Jupiter at the end of the video, but there's some evidence that Mercury opposition Jupiter may actually lead to actions which are potentially very unfortunate. Whether it's an accident, for example, I don't know, racing cars. There is an infamous accident in a racing track with Mercury opposition Jupiter, where two famous drivers were killed. I'll be looking at that, and also there's at least one massacre. In fact, two massacres have Mercury opposition Jupiter. So it's not just about the mind. It can actually be about events. So it's not necessarily a particularly good aspect, Mercury opposition Jupiter, though maybe this Mercury opposition Jupiter is a little bit different because it's in mutual reception, because you've got Mercury in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's sign, you've got Jupiter in Gemini, which is in Mercury's sign. So there is a good relationship in terms of the exchange of signs between Mercury and Jupiter. So maybe there's sort of a mitigation there. But somehow Mercury and Jupiter support each other if they're focused on the right thing. But still, I think it's an aspect that we do need to treat with a certain amount of caution. Now, just quickly turning to the situation for Sydney, Australia, for noon in Sydney. As usual, this is just a representative of Australasia and Eastern Asia. And so at noon in Sydney, Australia, the moon is actually at 25 Gemini. So it's a very, I won't say a very different chart, but it's a somewhat different chart if you're in Australasia or Eastern Asia, because there is a more of a Gemini emphasis. And you can see that the moon, it's not about the moon being opposition Venus. It's not about moon being in Cancer. It's about moon being in Gemini square Neptune. And so moon being in Gemini, it's just possible that the moon is trying to make sense of things, is trying to be logical, but maybe Neptune sort of trips it up. The emotional side of things isn't fully taken into account, and so it may be about saying things without realizing that the emotional environment is changing. I mean, that's one possibility. Or perhaps we're thinking about things, Moon in Gemini, we're trying to be logical, but we're ignoring certain emotional realities. I mean, that's one possibility in terms of the way that Moon square Neptune could work. I mean, I suppose all of us to an extent may feel a certain Moon square Neptune sense today, particularly at the beginning of the day, but I think it's going to be most apparent in East Asia and Australasia. So let me now turn to the heliocentric picture, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system. So turning to that, and we have, there we go. So from a heliocentric perspective, the Earth is still conjunct Uranus. I mean, it's not exact, but okay, it's less than 2 degrees away. But, Earth conjunct Uranus at the same time as heliocentrically, geocentrically, we've got Mercury opposition Jupiter. Yeah, things can happen today. That's certainly possible. So we shouldn't expect things necessarily to be sort of completely stable. Sudden ideas, sudden events. We have to perhaps consider how we react. Sometimes we can overreact and just take things too seriously. Also, look at Mars. Mars is at heliocentrically 2828 Gemini. It's moving towards a square of Neptune at 2852 Pisces. So Mars square Neptune, that gives us the idea of putting one's energy potentially into the wrong things. Getting excited about something which is not worth getting excited about, perhaps being tempted to sort of stray off the beaten track and put one's energy into things which are simply not advisable. They can be a bit sort of sleazy and underhand, and perhaps even in certain extreme circumstances tinged with criminality. That's how Mars square Neptune can work, but it is a heliocentric chart. And so, as it's a heliocentric aspect, Mars square Neptune, it's more general. It's not quite so personal. At least I think that's how these heliocentric aspects work. They say they're more about how the collective is operating rather than necessarily for individuals. So perhaps it's the way society is going, the way society is feeling about itself. So those are the main things. Oh yeah, Venus. Venus is moving to a square of Jupiter. And so Venus over the next day or two making the exact square to Jupiter. So Venus square Jupiter, it's a bit like perhaps what I was saying with Moon opposition Venus. Geocentrically, it can be a little bit overindulgent. It can take things too far. And in terms of how we behave, we don't want to behave excessively. It's perhaps not a time for excessive displays of emotion, although it is an emotional environment that we are now in with the Moon moving into Cancer. So the emotional side of things is highlighted, but we do have to understand that emotions do have their limits, and we don't want to behave in ways which are inappropriate. So that's the heliocentric picture, and I now want to look at today, which is November the 18th, Monday, November the 18th, 2024, from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, November the 18th. Aries. Aries, there are a few things going on today which certainly need to be taken note of. So one thing that's going on is that the Moon is moving into Cancer. Okay, it may go into Cancer tomorrow if you're in, or this evening, quite late in the day if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But in general, there is a Moon in Cancer feel to the day. So with the Moon moving into Cancer, Aries, you may feel that maybe you want to ground yourself, that there has been a lot going on. I know it's a Monday, beginning of a week, new challenges, but are you actually ready for those new challenges? You perhaps feel that your first priority, Aries, is to look after yourself and to make sure that you are fully protected. And I mean, I don't mean protected in the sense that there's anything terrible going to happen, but just feeling safe and secure. And I think in many respects, Aries, you will enjoy the home comforts. You will enjoy being places where you feel that you're in control. And when you're in control, when you're feeling comfortable, you're going to be a nicer person. Now, there may be temptations, maybe not temptations, that's perhaps the wrong word, pressure at least, to move outside your comfort zone. And that's because the moon is opposition Venus. So that moon opposition Venus might represent those temptations. But I think you need to get the balance right. For sure, you've got to take into account outside pressures, particularly if that pressure is coming from specifically one other person. You have another person in your life. They want to do something. You don't particularly want to do it. You're happy where you are. And, you might be a little bit of a homebody. I mean, that's not a word it's not a word I use. And it's not a word that one would particularly, well, I've just used it, but it's not something one normally associates with Aries, but maybe today one might. So, and one normally thinks also of Aries putting on the pressure, but it may actually be someone else putting on the pressure on you to go places and do things you don't really want to do. And, you can get annoyed. And so the question is, how do you deal with pressure? It just might be just a case of just being assertive and saying you're not interested, or later, putting something off, just waiting until you feel that you are somewhat more balanced. I mean, not that I'm saying you're unbalanced. I'm just saying that you might want to sort of wait for the right time, though it might be difficult to do things completely your way, because there are certain things that just may be hard to avoid. And one aspect that I didn't talk about in the introduction to the overall planetary picture is a semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. Now remember, Mars is moving very slowly at the moment. Mars is starting to, Mars, your ruler, is grinding to a standstill. I think it's December the 6th that finally Mars goes stationary retrograde. But that means that everything perhaps feels that it's more drawn out. And at the moment, we've got a semi-square between Mars and Jupiter. And that semi-square between Mars and Jupiter, I think it was technically exact yesterday, but Mars is moving so slowly that it's still very close today. So there is a Mars-Jupiter feel to what you're experiencing. Mars-Jupiter feel, there is that pressure to act, even if you don't want to act. And when you do act, it may be done sort of in a fairly begrudging kind of way. And so you do something you don't really want to do. And because you don't really want to do it, you might not do it very well. You know how it is, how the unconscious can work. If you don't want to do something and someone wants you to do it, what you can do is you do it, but at an unconscious level, you do it badly. And the message you're giving, don't ever ask me to do that. Don't ever ask me to do that again, because you've now seen what happened. Look, something got broken, something got destroyed. It was more trouble than it was worth. So if you're doing something that you don't want to do, watch very carefully how you do it. Maybe you have to do it, in which case, do an adequate job. I'm not saying you necessarily have to do a perfect job, but in particular, don't try to prove a point. Or is that passive aggression? It could be passive aggression. You agree to do something, but you don't do it very well, and maybe you make a complete mess up of it in a sort of unconscious way. But try not to do that. I don't think. I think that's something that you should avoid. And perhaps, Aries, it's just best to do what you want to do. If you're going to be a little bit self-contained, even a bit selfish, then do it properly. If you try to meet people halfway, it might just be more trouble than it's worth. Though, Aries, I don't want to give the impression that you're just going to be sort of moody and sort of wanting to get away from everyone. Your verbal skills are excellent. When you're talking about things that you want to talk about, when you're on your territory, you're going to have plenty of good ideas, and once you're comfortable, you're going to be on really good form. And the things you say, I think, will be very interesting. Taurus, it's nice that the moon is moving into Cancer. The moon does kind of have a special relationship with Taurus because the moon is exalted in Taurus. So I think that you, to a great extent, can benefit from the moon in Taurus. It allows you to be yourself, tell people what's on your mind, and I think that in general you're going to feel comfortable, though there is a certain choosiness here because the moon is actually making an opposition to Venus. So that tension might be about perhaps thinking about where you are, and you might be very sensitive to environment. I mean, you're going to be forward-looking. You're going to be ready to experiment to an extent, but on your terms. Moon opposition Venus, if the environment isn't right, if it doesn't make you feel comfortable, then you'll know it immediately. It's like if you move into a sort of a strange setting, somewhere unusual, somewhere you've sort of never been before, you're immediately going to feel that something's wrong, and you're going to want to respond accordingly, which, in other words, just means leave. I think that there might be a sense of that, Taurus. And if you just have a sudden impulse to leave, then perhaps that's what you should do. I mean, you don't want to suffer. You don't want to feel out of place. So placement, Taurus, today really is very important. And, there are going to be certain people and situations that I think do make you feel bad, make you feel uncomfortable, which perhaps make you think about less optimistic possibilities. You can be optimistic, but you can be deeply pessimistic at the moment. And you might be sort of tempted, if things are not absolutely right, to see things in the absolute worst possible way. And you might just become aware of everything that could go wrong. And again, I just do think that has so much to do with your environment and who you're with. And if you're with the wrong people, and I've kind of suggested this already, but if you're with the wrong people, this could have an absolutely catastrophic impact on your mood. You could get down very, very quickly. And so it is better to be alone than to be with the wrong people. Although being alone has its own problems, because if you are completely alone, then you're allowing your mind to drift potentially. And if your mind is in free drift, then it might start to spiral into negativity. So it's probably the case, Taurus, that you do need company today, that company would be best, or at least you need to have access to the right kind of people. Because once you've got that access, you've got this bit of a pressure valve for you. You can perhaps talk about some of your concerns. You do have concerns. I mean, we all have concerns. I mean, by the way, I'm talking to Taurus. I do have a Taurus ascendant, so don't feel that I'm sort of singling you out. I'm potentially talking about something that may be a reflection of myself, because I do have what's my ascendant around 4 degrees Taurus. But what you don't want to get involved in is sort of negative thinking, because I think that would be unnecessary. And if you have the right company, I do think that can be avoided. Gemini. So Gemini, the big aspect today is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Now, these planets, Mercury and Jupiter, they're actually going quite slowly. I mean, it may not just be something about today. In fact, because Mercury is about to go retrograde, we get another Mercury opposition Jupiter on December the 4th. So Mercury and Jupiter for the rest of the year is fairly persistent. It's a persistent feature of what's going on, and so be aware of that. So as far as what Mercury opposition Jupiter means, this opposition between Mercury and Jupiter, is just right across the main axis of your chart. So you're going to have Jupiter is in Gemini, your sign. It's retrograde, and Mercury is in Sagittarius. So the Mercury-Jupiter opposition may have a lot to do with relationships and how you get on with people. And the Mercury-Jupiter opposition means that, I think that there are certain people you just cannot avoid. And, with Mercury and Sagittarius, there may be a certain sense that, your happiness and perhaps even your plans are dependent to an extent on another person, that you feel perhaps that you might be in another person's territory. And in other words, you don't have full control. And I think that this Mercury-Jupiter opposition does represent dependency. But I suppose it also relates to interdependency. So it's not necessarily just about you being dependent on another person. Other people are dependent on you. I think in international relations, there's a lot of the concept of interdependence. It's a very optimistic, but I think it's a potentially quite an optimistic, fairly globalistic view of international relations. That countries have to work together. They are interdependent, and so maybe you're not a globalist though. But with Mercury opposition Jupiter, perhaps you need to think about interdependence. But you and other people are reliant on each other. That there is a necessity for some degree of cooperation. And you might not want to cooperate. And it may be with Mercury opposition Jupiter, you have to cooperate with people you potentially don't like. But right now, you've got something to offer them, and they've got something to offer you, and it may not be a zero-sum situation. I mean, I know we, in this dog-eat-dog world, we tend to think everything is zero-sum. If we help someone else, we're just being naive, because the favour won't be returned. But I think in this case, the favour might be returned and it might be just quite organic. I suppose you can think about, species, animal species and animal and plant species, that they coexist and they can help each other survive and prosper. So perhaps that's how you need to look at relationships, because relationships could be an area of real conflict with that Mercury opposition Jupiter. But somehow that conflict can be not just dynamic, but you can work with it. And very often it's good to have people who disagree with you. And one of the sort of good things about being a Gemini, if Gemini is working on good form, is that Geminis can understand criticism and not necessarily take it to heart. So if you are criticized by someone, don't get upset about it. Even if the motives for that criticism might not be perfect, you might still be able to benefit from it. So I think that Mercury-Jupiter opposition can be very helpful, just provided it doesn't encourage you to go over the top. It could, because Jupiter is an expansive, excessive planet. I mean, I suppose expansive in a positive sense, excessive when it goes too far. So Jupiter opposition Mercury just could encourage you to take something too far. You get into something and then you keep going, you keep moving in that same direction. Whatever it is, perhaps it stimulates you, perhaps it amuses you, whatever it is, and you just don't know when to stop. So that is something you need to bear in mind with Mercury opposition Jupiter. And I mean, you can go too far in many different directions. So I suppose Moon is moving into Cancer. I suppose that might have some impact on your finances. Moon is opposition Venus, and Moon in Cancer opposition Venus in Capricorn. There is a certain tension there with money. Perhaps that's about you going too far, or perhaps you going too far in one direction or another. Some Geminis may go too far in the sense of over expenditure. Other Geminis may go too far in being quite mean with their money, just not wanting to spend money even on things that are really essential. So that kind of depends. I mean, I actually got a comment on my video in terms of the way I've been dressing recently. That I've been sort of dressing as if it's super freezing, and I've got a scarf, and this is I know the presentation of this video is dreadful, but and the decor is awful, but still the way I dress myself, people think, what about the heating? You're going to freeze, turn up the heating. I mean, is that Gemini just not wanting to spend money on heating, or feeling, or not wanting to, just being concerned about the economic cost of something? And that can, about all costs are economic, sorry, that's a stupid thing to say, but that can be a Gemini thing. Geminis can be concerned about the cost of things, whether or not it's absolutely, strictly speaking, necessary. So with Mercury opposite, with the Moon in Cancer opposition Venus, some Geminis may not be over generous. They may actually go the other way. They might begrudge expenditure. They may feel that it's something that should be avoided at all costs. So in terms of expenditure, you've got to be balanced. Obviously, you've got to make sure the book's balanced, but at the same time, you don't want to go in the opposite direction. Cancer, it's nice that the Moon is moving into your sign. So, the Moon moving into your sign, it just immediately makes you feel more comfortable. You're better able to express yourself, and you're better able to look after yourself, and the way you feel it's more in tune with everything going on around you, and in terms of how you come over, you do come over at the moment in a fairly balanced way, and you're sensitive, but probably not too sensitive. So I think that puts you in a fairly nice position, though the moon does make an opposition to Venus, and that moon opposition Venus could relate to another person. Venus is in Capricorn at the moment, which is your opposite sign, and so with moon opposition Venus, it may be that someone else is bugging you. They're sort of not necessarily being completely sympathetic to you. I mean, most people are being sympathetic to you. In general, you feel nurtured by your environment, but just it may be someone is not as nurturing as they should be. And I suppose, that's Venus in Capricorn. Capricorn is a different sign from Cancer. Capricorn is more about perhaps the material side of things, perhaps, worrying about what things look like, what the cost of things, being perhaps a little bit concerned about status. But this person, whoever they might be perhaps an irritant. But I wouldn't have thought a serious irritant. I think it's something you can tolerate and sort of perhaps come to some understanding of. And so in terms of relationships, it just may be the case that things are not entirely smooth, that you have to make some effort to sort of understand what someone wants. And also moon opposition Venus, your sense of what looks good and what looks bad is going to be quite finely tuned. I mean, it's always good to have an aesthetic view of the world, but it can be taken too far. You may be a little bit quick to regard something as tasteless or ugly. And, just because something seems to be tasteless or ugly doesn't mean that it should necessarily be avoided. I mean, we live in a beautiful world, but we'll also live in an ugly world, and beauty and ugliness can coexist. And some things that may not be to your taste, that you even find slightly repugnant, should nonetheless be given at least a look in. I mean, just to see what's going on. Don't just reject something just because of its surface appearance. I suppose it's like this video, isn't it? I mean, you're watching this video. I mean, thank you for watching this video, but maybe there's something about this video that just puts you off. I mean, maybe, but, perhaps give me a chance. Listen to my message. But it's not just about me, isn't it? It's just about things going on around you, that your sense of aesthetics it's finely tuned, and there's just a possibility that you judge something a little too quickly. Judging it on the basis of your emotions. And only the Cancerian emotional judgment, that's an important process. Cancerians emotionally do have strong likes and dislikes, and don't necessarily give in to the first feeling that you have. Leo, you do want to say things, and I think that today you can say things with great power and great conviction. I mean, if you want to. I think that people are going to listen to you because you have that sort of fundamental power, and I don't think you're going to want to hold back. And it's intensified by the fact that Mars is still moving through Leo, and it's still in mutual reception with the Sun. that makes you very strong. Now, just a reminder, that mutual reception between the Sun and Mars is not going to last forever. So that would be, I think it's on Thursday, maybe Friday, Friday, Sun moves into Sagittarius. So when Sun moves into Sagittarius, that Sun-Mars mutual reception is over. So I don't know when the next Sun-Mars mutual reception is. Probably not for a few. No, wait, it will be next year, because will it be next year? No, it won't, because the Sun is not going to be in Scorpio. So that could be an issue. When is the next? I mean, I suppose, as I brought up the point, when is the Sun? That is an interesting question. When is the Sun next in mutual reception to Mars? Well, you may get it again when the Sun moves into I don't know. I think you probably yeah. I mean, talking about the Sun. I mean, I know you're not really interested. This is just an obscure point. The Sun will be in mutual reception again for about 2 days. For about 2 or 3 days around the 18th, 19th of April next year, because that's when Mars will be in Leo and the Sun will be in Aries. So they will be in each other, but just for 2 days, and then it's gone. And so make the most of Sun and Mars being in mutual reception, over the course of this week. But Mars is also, at the moment, it's semi-square Jupiter, and so Mars semi-square Jupiter, with Mars moving through Leo, you just might want to take something a little bit too far, because you will be very energized with that Mars semi-square Jupiter, particularly in company. When there are people around you, people who are prepared to listen to you, you're going to be able to, really express yourself. And in fact, you might go too far, because Mars is not just making a semi-square to Jupiter. It's also making a sesquiquadrate to Mercury. So that is very vibrant. And so, yeah, if you've got something to say, you can most certainly say it, and people will pay attention to you. Now, once they've paid attention to you, then what? Well, they may not like your message. That's possible. They may love it. They may find that it's a little bit disturbing. But, whatever it is, there's a right way to say it. And I'm confident, Leo, that you can find the right words, and just perhaps use a little bit of sensitivity. There's no reason why you can't find that sensitivity, because the moon is currently in Cancer. And so with the moon moving through Cancer, it does mean that you're able to understand things that aren't immediately obvious. It does give you a little bit of sensitivity, and that sensitivity could actually be very useful. And it's a reminder also that the Sun, your ruler, is in Scorpio. It is in a water sign. You've got the moon in a water sign as well. So, before talking your head off, before pushing your agenda, at least in a verbal sense, just make some effort to understand what's happening around you on an emotional level, and that will just mean that there's a much greater chance that you can be heard and also be appreciated too, and perhaps get the message right, and people will listen to you, and perhaps they'll just accept that your view is the right view. Virgo, the main aspect today is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. And this opposition between Mercury and Jupiter, does affect you. It's not just that Mercury is opposition Jupiter, by the way. Mercury is making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. So, Mercury, your ruler. It's under, I would have said, quite a lot of pressure. And there is a question of, how exactly do you respond to this pressure? So, your Mercury, is in Sagittarius. I think that this is a time, Virgo, in general, where you're trying to work things out, where you don't really want to take things too quickly. I mean, you understand that things are, in a sense, moving quickly, but, Mercury is slowing down. Mercury is going to go retrograde soon. And you're feeling that. You want to slow down. And you'd like to do things in a sort of a logical, systematic way. And you want to be the one making the rules. But, like it or not, there are outside pressures, pressures which I just don't think that you can easily avoid. There may be pressure on you to do something that you don't want to do. You feel that it's too much effort. At the same time, there may be just little things which are just starting to annoy you. And, you want to pull back. You want to sort of retreat. But that's not going to help, because whatever's happening, it's not going to go away. And so perhaps you need to sort of work out how to deal with things. Now, Mercury is in mutual reception to Jupiter. So we have Mercury making an opposition to Jupiter. But because the two planets are in mutual reception, it may be that many of the things that are putting pressure on you are actually working in your best interests, even if it doesn't feel like it. So if you're being asked to do something that you don't want to do, don't just be stubborn for the sake of it. Don't just say no without actually thinking it through. It may be that you're being asked to do something which is actually in your best interests, if it's executed in the proper way. So try to understand other people's motives, particularly if you're dealing with people who you know well, because it's a time when, certain relationships may be under a little bit of pressure, when I think that you're very aware that you and certain other people do have big differences. You're not looking at the world in the same way, and you have different priorities, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't find common ground. You may want different things, but at the same time, there is, I think, scope here for very sort of useful cooperation. Indeed, it can perhaps be a time when when you can cooperate with people that under normal circumstances you can't stand. You shouldn't be thinking about it just in terms of the social dynamic. You should be thinking about the eventual gain, or perhaps the avoidance of loss. So I wouldn't be too stubborn about it, because I think that it could all work in your favour, and in another person's, and in someone else's favour as well. I mean, that's good. If you benefit, someone else benefits, everyone benefits, that's fine. So that is, I think, a little bit of a challenge for you. And at the same time, the moon is in Cancer, or at least the moon is moving into Cancer. Okay, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon won't move into Cancer probably until this evening. But the moon in Cancer, from your perspective, that's quite nice. It does give you a certain ability to understand what's happening at an emotional level. I think that regardless of what you feel privately, in a social sense, you can be quite effective and quite responsive and quite sympathetic. Just be careful what you say, because Mercury opposition Jupiter, there are many ways in which Mercury-Jupiter opposition can manifest. But one way you could say, well, Mercury is not just your ruler, it's a planet of communication. So Mercury opposition Jupiter can be about saying too much, or using the wrong words, or saying things which just cause trouble. Virgo can do that. Virgo can just make an observation. Seems to you a very obvious observation, but that observation could hurt people's feelings. But there's no need to hurt people's feelings, because I do think that the moon in Cancer can protect you from doing that. It can give you just that little bit of sensitivity that you do need. And also the fact that Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. It can be mutually supporting. But, it's not a situation where your gain is someone else's loss, or someone else's loss is your gain. Everyone can be a winner. Libra, we have the moon moving into Cancer, and the moon moving into Cancer makes an opposition to Venus. Now, this moon moving into Cancer, an opposition to Venus, okay, maybe more about tomorrow if you are in Australia or New Zealand, but if you're in Europe, the Americas, perhaps Africa, the moon opposition Venus is about today. But with the moon moving into Cancer, Libra, I think that you feel that you have got something to offer, and you're prepared to be noticed. You don't mind perhaps taking social initiatives, and if people want to listen to you, and perhaps even try to understand that perhaps your way of doing things may be the best way of doing things, that is possible. So you can do all of this, and I think you can actually be very effective. But it still could be a little bit of a challenge, because the moon is opposition Venus. I think that with Venus in Capricorn, part of you would prefer to just perhaps not be noticed. I mean, it's less complicated not being noticed, doing things your way. But I think you recognize that you do need some feedback, and that also other people need to hear what you have to say, and also they need to see they need to be able to see what you can do. And so, for example, with Moon in Cancer, if from a working perspective, if you are working, so today can be with Moon in Cancer, you can be very effective, and you can understand your responsibilities. You may feel at times it's a little bit too much because the moon is opposition Venus, but the moon in Cancer is going to support and sort of protect you. And also the moon in Cancer is starting to make a trine to Saturn. I mean, that moon trine Saturn is going to be more of a feature of tomorrow, but still that moon trine Saturn does give you sort of grounding and stability. Though, Libra, you're still somewhat aware of what could go wrong. Maybe that's a good thing. You're not going to be entirely relaxed today, I don't think. And you will understand that, the world we're living in is unstable. That not everything can be taken for granted. And you'll actually be quite good at considering all the things that can happen. So you take an action, and that action can have many different consequences. And some of those consequences could be bad if everything goes wrong. And I think, Libra, that you're very aware of what could happen if everything went wrong. If there is a total breakdown And I think that you can almost sort of just imagine it in your head. You can almost play the film in your head of everything going wrong. And that might sound a little bit negative, not something you want to hear. But if you're thinking about all the things that could go wrong, that may put you in a good position in terms of self-protection. If you understand how things can go wrong, then perhaps you can stop things going wrong. And sometimes people just refuse to admit to themselves that the worst possible scenario could happen. But I don't think you're limiting yourself like that. And by preparing for the worst possible scenario, then you're just making yourself that much safer. And in fact, you're making it even less likely that that kind of scenario happens. So today, Libra, there is a little bit of pessimism, a little bit of grittiness there, an awareness that not everything is going to be easy. And there may be moments over the course of the day where you do feel a little bit frustrated. But if you keep pushing away, or rather keep grinding away, and you're very persistent, then that will definitely pay off. I mean, a gritty approach can certainly work. I mean, I'm not saying that you necessarily need a gritty approach, but just at times today, you just might feel that things are difficult, things are hard work, but provided you don't give up, I think that things will eventually work out fine. Scorpio, Mars is your ruler, and Mars is doing some interesting things. I mean, Mars, for example, is slowing down. I mean, it's kind of slowing down in a big way. I mean, I think that Mars currently, if you look at the Raphael's Ephemeris, they have a little table telling you how fast the planets are going on particular days as you move through the planetary motion. So normally Mars moves at around 48 arc minutes, something like that, 48 arc minutes a day. That's sort of its standard pace. But right now, Mars is preparing to go retrograde. So if you look at the table for Mars for today, which is the 18th, you see that Mars is actually only moving 13 arc minutes a day. So that's slow, and it's getting slower because Mars turns retrograde on December the 6th. Or something like that. And so Mars is slowly at the moment, for example, making a semi-square to Jupiter. So that Mars semi-square Jupiter is having an impact. And so although Mars is very slow, that Mars semi-square Jupiter is perhaps somewhat fast. And so perhaps you're slowing down, but certain events may be speeding up. So Mars semi-square Jupiter you may find that you are encouraged to take something too far. You don't want to take it too far, but somehow you find yourself taking it too far. And also we have got Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Mars, because we've got a Mercury-Jupiter opposition today. And that Mercury-Jupiter opposition completely links up with Mars. And I will actually be discussing that at the end of the video when I look at the Mercury-Jupiter opposition in detail. So Mars, your ruler, is pressurized, and you may be trying your hardest to be reasonable, but somehow you might find yourself, just taking things too far. Just in the heat of a moment, you go further than you want. So, try to be very aware of what's happening and what's unfolding. And there's no reason why you can't be aware of what's happening. And you're helped, I think, by the fact that the moon is moving into Cancer. So moon moving into Cancer, is about sensitivity. It's about understanding what is happening on an emotional level. And we've got the sun in Scorpio, in a water sign, in mutual reception to Mars. We've got moon in Cancer, in a water sign. So that does give you perhaps the sensitivity you need to understand where something might lead, because I just don't think you want to just take things too far just for the sake of it, or because you don't understand what's going on. Just one thing leads to another. In fact, you may be too slow to react, and that might be why things might get out of control. So if you were to act quickly, then there wouldn't be a problem. But you just take things as they come, and you're not really aware of what's happening, and then suddenly you realize it's all a big mess. But that moon in Cancer gives you the potential to actually understand where something is going before it actually happens. And the reason you can understand is just through plain Scorpio sensitivity, using your feelings to work out actually what is happening. Another thing, Scorpio, I think I said this when I was talking about the weekend, that you are quite talkative at the moment. Scorpios can be very talkative, and maybe that's useful. Maybe that's a way to prevent a problem getting out of hand. Perhaps you can slow things down and slow people down by talking, because you actually have got a lot to say. And once you start talking, the talking just keeps going. And, for example, you might want to understand what's happening. You might want an explanation. And if you want an explanation, you can ask for an explanation, and you can keep talking until you get the explanation you need. So, in fact, it could actually be quite a good day for constructive conversation. Conversation where the other person, you might not get on particularly well with them, but still things can be said. And by bringing everything out into the open and by talking about it, Scorpio, that might mean that you can prevent some larger problem from coming to the surface. So things should come to the surface to an extent, but because we don't want to hide anything. And so perhaps, in fact, it's about bringing things to the surface in a sort of verbal and intellectual way, being able to understand them, and as a result, they don't have to manifest. That these things which may be undesirable don't actually have to manifest in the physical world. But most importantly, Scorpio, it's just important to be, very moderate, not take things to extremes, not to overreact, because what we're looking for today is quiet. You can be constructive, but you want to be able to plan things. You don't want to be in a situation where things happen that you don't understand. But that would be unnecessary, I think, if you just listen to your feelings and you're prepared to ask questions. So I think, Scorpio, actually today you do have quite a big element of choice. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, the main aspect today is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. So Mercury is moving through your sign, and Jupiter is moving through Gemini, your opposite sign. So this Mercury-Jupiter opposition does seem to affect you in quite a direct way. And it may be that you feel that you are under a certain amount of pressure, that you don't feel that you necessarily have full control, that what's happening at the moment in your life is being influenced by outside forces that you don't necessarily understand. I mean, even if you do understand them, you may not feel that you're in any position to stop them, that you're in any position to intervene. And so it's tempting, Sagittarius, to think that all the power lies elsewhere. But that would not be entirely true, because this opposition between Mercury and Jupiter, we've got Mercury moving through Sagittarius, and I think with Mercury moving through Sagittarius, there is a sense that some people are actually quite reliant on you, and there may even be a sense in which the world is kind of waiting for you to make up your mind, and nothing happens without your permission. It might not feel like it. So it's actually a situation that is more balanced than it seems. So if you feel that the power balance is entirely against you, that it's everyone else that's got the power, I think you'd be wrong. I think the power is distributed fairly evenly, and so I think it's important that you recognize the limits of everyone else's power and control, and you look at the ways in which you can have an influence. And there are many ways in which you can make an impact. And if we look at this Mercury-Jupiter opposition, I mean, the key thing about this Mercury-Jupiter opposition is that it is in sort of there's a mutual reception here. So Jupiter is your ruler. It's in Gemini. It's retrograde. So on the surface, it's not in a very good position, because Jupiter, it's retrograde, plus it's in Gemini, which is a sign of its detriment. Then you look at Mercury. Again, Mercury doesn't seem to be in a very good position, because Mercury is in Sagittarius. Again, the sign of its detriment, but it's in mutual reception. Mercury is in Jupiter's sign. Jupiter is in Mercury's sign. So Mercury and Jupiter are helping each other, and they're complementing each other. So ultimately, nothing really happens without your permission. And in the same way, if you want something to happen, you may need someone else's permission. So permission is required on both sides, and both parties can stop things happening. So don't necessarily assume a conflict. Sure, it's a situation where there are people and situations where there are people and events that are at odds with you, people who you don't agree with. You may not even like them, but that doesn't mean to say that everyone has to be at war. And indeed, everyone can help each other. And that, I think, is a message for today. It can be a great day for, sort of mutual cooperation, where everyone can help each other achieve their aims, whatever they might be. And that does need quite a mature approach, because you are dealing with people that you don't necessarily get on with. Yet I can't help but noticing that Mars is making a semi-square to Jupiter. I mean, I think that the Mars-Jupiter semi-square was exact on Sunday, I believe, but still, Mars is going to go stationary retrograde in December, so you're going to get this aspect again sooner or later. But with Mars semi-square Jupiter, there is a certain danger, Sagittarius, that you might go too far. You might go too far because you misunderstand the situation. It might be a situation where you think you have no power. And because you think you have no power, you think that you have to go over the top in order to get your way. And I think that you'd be mistaken. So before you use dramatic energy, before you pull out all the stops, try to work out what's going on first. Try to really understand, for example, people's motives, and also understand your own motives. So don't jump to conclusions. That does matter. And with a moon in Cancer, Sagittarius, on an emotional level, you do have the capacity to understand what people are thinking and what people are feeling and understand their motives, and just to be able to understand the sort of underlying dynamics. So Sagittarius, I think it's actually quite a complicated day, but it's a day when if you're prepared to show restraint and a bit of maturity, I think that you'll be able to really get to grips with things. Capricorn. Capricorn, we have the moon moving from Gemini into Cancer. Okay, this aspect, the moon might not move into Cancer until this evening if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but I think for most of us the moon will be in Cancer for much of the day. And so moon moving into Cancer, Cancer is of course your opposite sign, and so with moon moving into Cancer, it just may be a time when you need to pay some attention to other people and their needs. It may not be something that you entirely want to do, because the moon in Cancer does make an opposition to Venus, and that moon opposition Venus is perhaps about your tastes and what you feel is appropriate and what you feel is, of course, is what is inappropriate. And I think moon opposition Venus may be a situation where you can't help but notice other people and what they're doing, but at the same time you may not like their style. Venus in Capricorn, Venus obviously moving through your sign. Venus is quite reserved, and Venus in Capricorn has standards. It has standards of behavior, has standards of decorum, has aesthetic standards, what things look like. And with moon opposition Venus, you may feel that those standards are being broken, that people are not presenting themselves in a particularly harmonious way. People might seem crude, they might seem over emotional, just not to your taste. And so Capricorn, under those circumstances, probably a good idea to be tolerant. You can't expect everyone else to have your standards, to have your sense of balance. Some people are crude. They're loud. They're boastful. They're over emotional. But I suppose you could say, Capricorn, that is the nature of humanity. But it just seems more intense than usual. So if someone is clumsy in the way they present themselves, or they're over emotional, don't necessarily judge them too much. It may be that you're being too sensitive. It may be that they're just having a difficult day, or a day when they just can't help being crass and crude. So yeah, a bit of tolerance, I think, could go a long way. And at the same time, Capricorn, you should perhaps be aware that we're living in a world where nothing is clear at the moment. And perhaps that's the reason why some people are behaving how they are, because they don't understand because they don't understand what's going on. And I think that at the moment, the confusion swirling around everyone is pretty obvious to you, and you therefore have to understand that the confusing environment in which we're all of us living is having an effect. And perhaps you shouldn't blame people for their social mistakes, because it's not their fault. They're responding to collective pressure. We have a collective which is trying to work itself out, and it is hard. And This might have something to do also with the fact that Pluto is about to change sign. I mean, you look at Pluto. Pluto is now at what? 29:59 Capricorn. Last chance. I don't know. Pluto's been in your sign on and off for quite a long time. This is it. When Pluto leaves Capricorn, you will not experience Pluto in Capricorn again. Certainly not in this incarnation. So maybe Capricorn, it might just be a time for reflection. Think about, what's been going on over the last, I don't know, when did Pluto go into Capricorn? A long time ago, 2000 and, hold on, when was Pluto last in Capricorn? I mean, when did Pluto go into Capricorn? Just to give you, Pluto was going into Capricorn. I don't know. It started moving into Capricorn sort of on and off. 2009, around then. When was its first entry into Capricorn? That's something. That sort of. It went to 2008. I think Pluto's first entry into Capricorn was in 2008. So, that was the beginning of, that was the big economic crisis. Think back to 2008. What's been going on since then, and how have you changed with Pluto moving through your sign? So what's that? So 16 years. So 17 years. Yeah, it's a long time anyway. So think about how you've changed, and now it feels that it's all coming together, and it perhaps should be a time for just sort of thinking it through, and again going back to the way people are behaving, and is perhaps they're responding to the fact that there is going to be this big change coming up with Pluto moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. And so maybe it's a time today when you need to sort of do something symbolic which sort of reflects all the changes that have been going on in your life since 2008. But anyway, I'll be talking more about Pluto in Aquarius in tomorrow's video. Aquarius, tomorrow Pluto moves into your sign, so that's something to look forward to, I think, something to get excited about. But as far as today is concerned, Pluto is still in Capricorn, and the moon is in Cancer. And with the moon in Cancer, I think that you may feel that actually it is a time when there are certain things which need to be prepared. I mean, preparation can count for a great deal. Not everything is in order, and it's just you may feel that it's time when you need to sort of clear the decks. But clearing the decks can be difficult. There may be things disrupting and annoying you, because the moon in Cancer is making an opposition to Venus. Now, that moon opposition Venus may be more about tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but one way or another the moon is going to make that opposition to Venus, and so that moon opposition Venus Aquarius might make you feel that you know how you want things to be, but there are things happening which are just disruptive. They're preventing you from, in your opinion, really being yourself, and they're wasting your time, and you just feel a little bit annoyed about it. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. And I think that it's important not to blame anyone. I mean, it's easy to blame people. If things aren't going right, if something is more difficult than it should be, you may, in the first instance, feel you don't really want to take responsibility for it. You want to look at how other people might have created a mess for you. But it might be better, Aquarius, if you were just to take the view that this is just the world in which you're living in. At the moment, some things just aren't clear. As an Aquarius, as a Saturn-ruled sign, you'd like them to be clear, but right now, I don't think they are at all clear, and it's no one's fault. You might want to apportion blame, but blame doesn't help. It just may just be the way it is, and so I think, Aquarius, a bit of tolerance can actually go a long way. As far as other things going on, we do have Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Mars, and we actually have Jupiter making a semi-square to Mars. Now, the reason that is important is because Mars is in Leo, it's in your opposite sign. And so Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars may be more of the same problem. Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars is quite verbal, and it just may occur to you that there are just some people you just don't get on with, and it's very difficult for you to know what to do, and these people just may be in a stronger position than you, as I think I've already suggested. But the strength of other people. So if you're feeling there's a conflict going on, then I would suggest, Aquarius, that in the short term, you actually recognize that someone is in a stronger position than you are. You'd like that not to be the case, but it is the case. So if you're planning on taking anyone on or having an argument with someone, I would suggest you hold off, and at least until Mars is in a weaker position. And Mars's position is actually weakening. I mean, Mars is slowing down. It's about to go stationary retrograde. And also, at the end of a week, I think it's Thursday or Friday, the Sun moves into Sagittarius. And so when the Sun moves into Sagittarius, Mars is no longer in mutual reception with the Sun. So if there's someone who you want to have an argument with, or you maybe even want to defeat in an argument, maybe you should wait for a few days, wait for the Sun to move into Sagittarius, because certain people who are really annoying and difficult to budge at the moment just may be not in quite such a strong position. And so a little bit of patience might be required. And it may be, Aquarius, that it's just a time where certain people have to be just put up with. But maybe you can benefit from some people, at least in a creative and social sense. There is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter today, and Mercury and Jupiter are kind of reminding you that there is a certain clash between what you want to do and what other people want to do. And it just may feel that the clash might seem to be insoluble, but maybe you're looking at it wrong. It may be that you're not regarding some people as being helpful. You're not regarding them as a resource. But it just may be the case that there are people out there who could be incredibly helpful. They could really help you achieve some of your, creative targets if you gave them a chance. And I think that Mercury-Jupiter opposition may allow you to give them a chance. It requires you to, to be open-minded. And the thing is that Mercury is in Sagittarius, it's in mutual reception to Jupiter. And so that gives us the idea that certain people can help each other in a creative and social sense. So you can help other people, they can help you, and it can just, in the end, give you a sense of, what is possible. And also, Aquarius, don't be too close-minded. It's easy to think that there is only one way of doing things, but there's not. That's not true. And don't expect to have instant answers. Rather, allow things to develop in their own way. And if something isn't in order, just don't panic. Just see this as just a reflection of the world in which you're living. And just important to be realistic, and perhaps at some level to almost be part of the chaos without having your life messed up. I mean, I know that might be a tall order, but somehow I think it might be possible. Pisces, Moon is moving into Cancer, and for a Pisces, I think Moon moving into Cancer is something to be welcomed. Moon in Cancer, Cancer is a water sign, and so you're a water sign, and so with the moon moving into Cancer, I think that you have a sense of what you can do, and a sense of purpose, and also a sense that you can do things differently. You don't have to do things anyone else's way. I mean, I think there is pressure to conform, to do things according to the book, but I think that you can pretty safely ignore this pressure. Just follow your imagination. Your imagination is a resource. At times your imagination might be seeming to lead you into strange uncharted waters, but that's probably a good thing. I mean, at least in a creative sense. I mean, you need to be able to imagine things which perhaps on the surface seem impossible, but they can come true. At least they can come true in terms of your subjective creativity. I mean, you can create truths through art, through writing, through music, whatever self-expression whatever form of self-expression is best for you. Now, probably the main aspect today, the most important event, is an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Jupiter is, of course, your ruler, and Jupiter is in some respects not in a great position, because Jupiter's going retrograde and it's in Gemini, which is a sign of its detriment. And then you have this opposition to Mercury, opposition from Mercury, and it is disturbing. It's irritating, and there are things happening, things you're being told, things you're having to listen to, that are just not to your taste at all. And your immediate reaction would be to just shut it all down, to just close the curtains and just ignore it. But that is not the right approach. If something is irritating you today and is even annoying you, then there's a very high chance that what appears to be a problem is actually an opportunity. It's just in disguise. And that means, Pisces, that you do have to be very open-minded. You have to be prepared to listen, even if that's the last thing you want to do. Because, Mercury represents forces from the outside. At least in your chart it does. Mercury represents forces from the outside, everything that is not you. And as Mercury is opposition Jupiter, your first instinct is to feel a threat. But if you actually make the effort to understand what is happening and to understand the possibilities of the situation, then you'll start to realize that what seems a threat, could actually be an opportunity. But you've got to listen. You've got to be open-minded. And this can happen because Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. And in terms of people, it seems that the people who are least like you are the ones that can be most beneficial. Now, people can be beneficial in an active way. They can actually want to help you, but they can also be beneficial in a passive way. They didn't mean to help you, they just do. So you can benefit from people in many different ways, and you can even benefit from people who in certain situations are actually trying to, I won't say do you harm, but they may be trying to take advantage of you. But you can understand them. You can understand why they're trying to take advantage of you. And somehow you can sort of reverse the situation and be the winner. But it needn't just be about winners and losers. You can be useful to other people without giving anything away. And this relates to all aspects of your life, but it may relate to, could well relate to your work if you're working, or business or career or something like that. So if that's important to you, then look out for interesting challenges. A challenge that seems to be completely unwelcome, but it's just when you start to explore it, you may see that this is actually a way to really get ahead, maybe to really get involved in something which could be very useful. So it's just important to give everything a chance without taking any massive risks. But you just don't know. You don't know until you understand. You don't know until you listen. And so just being a little bit tolerant, Pisces, could be so useful. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 28, which is preponderance of the great. And it doesn't move. Now, preponderance of the great is quite a difficult hexagram. It just represents something that is really, really heavy. And it's difficult to move, and it's difficult to carry, and it just does feel a bit dangerous. And in fact, we may doubt our ability to see it through. It just may feel that it's just too much for us. But it is locked. So it's not moving. So because this hexagram is locked, because it's got no moving lines, this may feel like we've got a sort of an ongoing challenge to deal with something that is just too big, but there's actually no movement. We don't have to take it on if we don't want to take it on, but it's still there. And perhaps it's just something in the background that, okay, we could take it on if we wanted to. We perhaps could leave it. Probably we need to make some effort to see what's happening and to see what we can do. But we should not forget that Mercury is opposition Jupiter. Now, as I will be showing very soon, Mercury opposition Jupiter can actually be quite a dangerous aspect. It can encourage us to take on too much. It can encourage us to go too fast or to go too far or to over-dramatize the situation. And so that's not what we want to do. So it may be best if we're dealing with something that is overwhelming. We know that in theory we could do it, but in practice, perhaps we shouldn't. Perhaps we should leave it for later, or perhaps get some help. I don't think the obligation is totally pressing. I think we might feel that we have to do something, but it's absolutely important to shift whatever this object is. But maybe now might be not be the right time. Now, as far as the nuclear hexagram is concerned, the hexagram in the hexagram, you can see that we have got 4 unbroken lines in the middle. So if we knock off the top and the bottom lines, we get it's all unbroken lines. So the nuclear hexagram is therefore going to be hexagram number 1, which is the creative, and that's perhaps underlying the whole thing, that we're dealing with something that is quite difficult to deal with, because it is so massive. It's pure positivity. It doesn't necessarily have a purpose. It doesn't necessarily have a direction. It's just sheer energy. It's sheer purpose. It's the very beginning of something. And maybe that's it. It's that first spark, that first creative spark. And so in terms of the preponderance of the great, when we consider its nuclear hexagram, we are perhaps dealing with something which is important. But it may not just be a one-day thing. It's something we need to consider. And I suppose also, in fact, we've got Pluto going into Aquarius. So with all this going on, I think that we should perhaps be contemplating a sort of a larger task, and perhaps working out how best to deal with it, and also working out how it fits in, with who we are and where we are at this stage in our life. So I think this hexagram, normally I would say that with these hexagrams it's just for the day, but I think that this hexagram is not about doing anything. It's just a reminder that something needs to be done, and it could change everything once we do it. It's a heavy load, but just now might not quite be the right time for taking action. And particularly with that Mercury opposition Jupiter, which I'm just about to discuss, that can encourage us to take things too far. So let me now look at Mercury opposition Jupiter. So this Mercury-Jupiter opposition Jupiter, it's happening on and off, because Mercury is about to go retrograde. Jupiter's going pretty slowly. We get a Mercury-Jupiter opposition today. We also get a Mercury-Jupiter opposition, I think, on December the 4th, because Mercury is going forward. It goes past the opposition of Jupiter, then it goes backwards and sort of does it again. And I think then the same Mercury-Jupiter opposition, I think we get it again right at the end of the year. When do we get it? December the 4th, and we get it again on the 26th, around the 26th of December. So in December, there are 2 oppositions between Mercury and Jupiter, on the 4th and I think around the 26th. But anyway, the first Mercury-Jupiter opposition is today. And so here is the Mercury opposition Jupiter. It's got it somewhere. That's the precise moment it happens. It's sort of 8:55 London time today, and it'll be earlier in the day if you're in the Americas, later in the day if you're in Australia or New Zealand, for example. So what is Mercury-Jupiter about? So Mercury, I suppose, represents our thinking, and it represents our cognitions. And it's about how we intellectually respond to what's going on around us. But it's also just about our reactions and just how we respond to pressure. And so with Mercury opposition Jupiter, that Jupiter can just encourage us to just take things further, to take things perhaps a little too far. Now, that might be our mind going into overdrive. That's certainly possible. Just thinking too much. It could be about talking too much. That can be how Mercury-Jupiter opposition works, just having lots and lots of things to say. But it can also be about understanding, having a situation, we try to evaluate the situation, and we overreact, or we take things too far, with potentially catastrophic results. So that's broadly speaking how Mercury-Jupiter opposition works. I mean, of course, you've got to consider, the situation, and you've got, it can be a plus, it can be a minus. It kind of depends who you are, depends what kind of a person you are. And I'm not going to look at a huge number of people who have Mercury-Jupiter oppositions, and I'm going to look at some events now. But let's consider a couple of people. Some people we know. So, for example, Barack Obama. Barack Obama has Mercury opposition Jupiter. So here is Barack Obama's Mercury, and there is his Jupiter. And this Mercury-Jupiter opposition, I would have said in Barack Obama's case, has worked very well for him. Whatever you think of Barack Obama, he is extremely successful. Politically, obviously, he became president. He is, he wrote books. I think that's quite common, isn't it? They get into the Senate, and then they write a book, and the book, becomes a bestseller. So he's a very successful writer. Made a lot of money from his books. Of course, it helps when he became president. He'd make even more money. And as far as his oratory, I mean, there are going to be differences of opinion about how good an orator he is, but he's a reasonable orator. Certainly better from Kamala Harris, but he's able to communicate, and he's charismatic, and I think that Mercury-Jupiter opposition certainly has helped. And so, he has sort of Mercury in Leo, and Jupiter has perhaps encouraged that Mercury to move to the next stage. Or, you might notice also he's got Mercury on Black Moon Lilith. I don't really want to talk about his Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith, but I suppose you might say, what dark thoughts does he have under it all? I suppose you could say that. But that Mercury opposition Jupiter is very important. And it's important now, of course, because Pluto's about to go into Aquarius. Pluto is about to move on to his Jupiter, and Pluto is going to opposition his Mercury. By the way, his progressed midheaven is at 28 Scorpio, and his progressed midheaven is moving into is currently making a conjunction to Jupiter. And so, as I've said before, Barack Obama is not going away. I believe he's going to be extremely active over the next few years. We may not see him being active over the next few years, but I think that Barack Obama is going to be, I believe, very busy behind the scenes trying to deal with the Trump presidency and what it means. I think that people talk about the resistance to Trump, and I think this really does illustrate that Barack Obama is very much leader of a resistance. And I think that with Pluto on his Jupiter, absolutely. Pluto on his Jupiter, he's going to really want to push himself and really do whatever he can to fight back against Trump. Leader of resistance, and he's leader of the opposition, I would have said. I mean, he may not appear to be leader of the opposition, but I do think that we might not see it, but I think it will be happening certainly behind the scenes. But anyway, Barack Obama has Mercury opposition Jupiter, and I would argue that Mercury opposition Jupiter has actually worked quite well for him. Another politician who has Mercury opposition Jupiter is Tulsi Gabbard. So Tulsi Gabbard, she's just been given a position, hasn't she, that some intelligence role, and she has Mercury. There's her Mercury at 8 degrees Aries, and her which is opposition Jupiter in Libra. Now that's quite a wide opposition. It's 5 degrees apart, but I think you can perhaps see how her Mercury opposition Jupiter works. She's got Mercury in Aries. She's got loads of planets in Aries. She has got lots to say for herself, and once she starts talking, she doesn't stop, perhaps. And I suppose, like Obama, I think that she's an effective communicator. I mean, she's a reasonably effective orator. Again, someone else who's more of an effective orator from Kamala Harris. And in fact, in the 2020 debate for the Democrat nomination, it was Tulsi Gabbard that destroyed Kamala Harris. And so her Mercury opposition Jupiter so far is perhaps working well, but one wonders, how does that Mercury-Jupiter work when she's in a kind of a responsible role, when she's, for example, in the cabinet or defending herself in terms of a confirmation committee in the Senate? That Mercury opposition Jupiter might encourage her to say too much. I think that is a possibility, and she's not the only politician. She and Barack Obama, she's not the only one. We've got Emmanuel Macron. So Emmanuel Macron, he has got a dissociate Mercury-Jupiter opposition, Mercury in Sagittarius, opposition Jupiter in Cancer. So again, another politician who has got a lot to say, who full of ideas. His mind it doesn't stop, but it's in his case is Jupiter. In his case, he is Jupiter, isn't he? Because that's what some people call him. That's how he regards himself, as being Jupiter, above everything, superior to everything, and that perhaps informs his thinking. I mean, it can be a bit sort of delusional, but he is successful. Like with Barack Obama, we saw Barack Obama becoming president at a young age, and Emmanuel Macron becoming president at an even younger age. And even though that Mercury in Sagittarius is under so much pressure, being retrograde, being in the sign of its detriment, being combust, because it's being conjunct the Sun, still it seems to be working for him, at least in terms of power and success. And maybe the fact that Jupiter is in Cancer, in its exaltation, perhaps helps, but it does make him a sort of a larger than life person who can be something of a Jupiter figure, and also in terms of the way he communicates. So I think that suggests so far that Mercury opposition Jupiter is a good thing to have. And Taylor Swift, not that I have any real interest in Taylor Swift, but apparently she's very rich and very famous, and she has Mercury opposition Jupiter. So again, I suppose she communicates, she sings, she acts and she's on the stage. She's got a wonderful Jupiter in Cancer, and I don't know I don't have a time of birth, by the way, but her Jupiter is exalted. It's conjunct the Moon in Cancer. Moon is in its own sign, and Mercury is opposition that. So again, this is an example of, I would have said, that Mercury opposition Jupiter working extremely well. It does seem to be, very productive, and I suppose Mercury in Capricorn is, looking after its own interests, and Mercury conjunct Neptune, she's able to sort of plug into what people want, and also with Mercury in Capricorn, because she's able to plug into what people want, she's able to make money from it, and she's a prolific singer. She's been at at the top of her profession for quite a long time. I mean, maybe things are finally peaking now. Didn't help that she decided to endorse Kamala Harris, did it? Or probably made no difference. But anyway, she's got Mercury opposition Jupiter. Now, one final person I want to look at, a completely different person, someone who was completely abusing Mercury opposition Jupiter, was Roland Freisler. He was a Nazi. He was a Nazi judge, and he was, I think, was it president of the People's Court? With the bomb plot. When Hitler was killed in the bomb plot. Sorry, not obviously Hitler wasn't killed in the bomb plot. When there was an attempt to kill Hitler in the bomb plot, many of the people involved in that plot in 1944 came before him, and he was incredibly abusive. I mean, as you'd expect, I suppose, in Nazi Germany. He tried to humiliate people, he would shout people down, and that would be Mercury opposition Jupiter that he has in his chart. So there's his Jupiter, there's his Mercury. So it's quite close, it's within 1 degree. So he's got Mercury in Scorpio, opposition Jupiter in Taurus. So I suppose Mercury opposition Jupiter can be about being a little tyrant, a judge using his position to shout at people, belittle people, and of course there's a sort of a vindictiveness to this, and of course very often sentencing them to death. So Mercury opposition Jupiter is not always a good aspect, particularly if someone is in a position of power in a totalitarian state. And and he's very sort of focused on his position as judge, and right to the very end. I think he was killed in an American bombing raid in the end. It's just in the middle of the case. I think he was still clutching a file or something. Is that right? When in his dead body. That is how an alternative way in which Mercury opposition Jupiter can work. Now, in terms of events, I'm going to look at we've got 2 massacres happened with Mercury opposition Jupiter. Both these massacres I've sort of looked at fairly recently. So the My Lai massacre, which I think I looked at last week. I know it didn't happen in Saigon, it happened in My Lai, but the coordinates are for My Lai, not for Saigon, by the way. So at the time of the My Lai massacre, when American troops went into this village, My Lai, in 1968, and they were trigger happy, and they killed dozens of people, dozens of villagers. Yeah, and so that can be how Mercury opposition Jupiter can work. I mean, Mercury opposition Jupiter, taking things too far, overreacting. Remember, Mercury can be about cognition. And I suppose if you're in a war and you're traumatized anyway, and you're put into this village and you don't really understand it, you misinterpret, for example, the body language of the Vietnamese villagers, and you treat it as a threat, and you're trigger happy. And so Mercury-Jupiter can be about how someone responds to that, and the results can be tragic and disastrous. Another massacre that happened to take place at the time of a Mercury-Jupiter opposition is the Sandy Hook massacre, the school shooting. So Adam Lanza went into this elementary school and he killed, again, dozens of children, and I think a teacher and so forth. I mean, so I don't know. There were some adults killed as well, but again, Mercury is opposition Jupiter. It's not exactly opposition Jupiter, but it may sort of sum up the event. Mercury opposition Jupiter represents someone who is trying to work things out, and I think there was some planning here. I'm not sure about the precise details, but it just illustrates the point that Mercury opposition Jupiter can have unfortunate results. And the Mercury-Jupiter opposition can be about people mishandling a very dangerous task. And I'm thinking particularly of the San Marino Grand Prix in 1994. So San Marino is sort of a tiny state in the middle of Italy. I don't think Grand Prix doesn't actually happen in San Marino. I think it happens in Imola. So there was this Grand Prix, and two racing drivers were killed. And so one of them was Roland Ratzenberger. So he was killed on April the 30th, 1994. And so at the time of the Grand Prix, I think it took place over a couple of days. At the time of the Grand Prix, there you had Mercury at 10 degrees Taurus, opposition Jupiter in Scorpio. So I suppose if you're a racing driver, your main aim is to win, isn't that right? I mean, your main aim is to go as fast as possible, but then you've got to evaluate the risks, haven't you? I mean, I don't know. Driving is not something I'm a great expert on, but you have to evaluate the risks. And I suppose with Mercury opposition Jupiter, Mercury in Taurus opposition Jupiter in Scorpio, it just might be a time when one is so focused on what one wants to do that one perhaps ignores the risk. It lacks that flexibility to understand what's really going on, especially with this Mercury opposition Jupiter taking place in fixed signs. There's not much flexibility. You just keep doing it, and you want to get there, but you don't get there. And in this case, he died. So here's a chart of Ratzenberger's death. I think he was taken to hospital in Bologna, and that's where he died. So just quickly looking at Ratzenberger's natal chart while we're on the subject of Mercury and Jupiter. So Ratzenberger we don't know his time of birth. So he was an Austrian driver. He was born in Salzburg on July the 4th, 1960. I don't know his time of birth, though his moon was could have been 11 Scorpio. He had Neptune. He had Mars-Neptune opposition. But critically, he had his Mars at 10 degrees Taurus. So if you look at how that connected with what he's doing. So there's his Mars. So Mercury was conjunct his Mars, and Jupiter was opposition his Mars. So Mars in Taurus, that is quite persistent, it's quite stubborn. And so you can imagine how that Sun opposition Jupiter just encouraged him to just completely focus on what he wanted to do and just go as fast as he could. And Mercury opposition Jupiter, there was some cognitive misunderstanding there. I mean, it's easy to say, I don't know. I mean, I'm not into racing, Formula One racing. That's not one of my interests. But I think that there must have been some error of judgment there, I would have thought, especially as he has Mars opposition Neptune. And so that Mercury-Jupiter opposition was hitting his Mars. Now, a second driver was killed, a very famous driver, and that was Ayrton Senna. He was killed at the same Grand Prix. So Ratzenberger was killed on April the 30th, 1994, and Ayrton Senna was killed the next day. And he died in the accident, I think. And so, again, the positions of the planets are pretty similar. We've still got Mercury. Mercury's moved on a little, but it's still opposition Jupiter. Now we've got Sun opposition Jupiter. So Mercury, it was all sort of linking up. So if we look at what's happening to Ayrton Senna, so we've got a time birth for Ayrton Senna. So Ayrton Senna had Neptune. There was his midheaven, 8 degrees 15 Scorpio, and he had Neptune on the midheaven, and he had 11 degrees Aquarius rising. So this Mercury-Jupiter opposition was really right on his midheaven, and Mercury was square his ascendant. So for both drivers, you had this Mercury-Jupiter opposition, hitting them directly. So I think that this is just an illustration that this Mercury-Jupiter opposition can be quite a dangerous aspect. It can encourage us to take things too far. And I don't know the details of these two accidents, but cognition must play a role. I don't think it's necessarily just bad luck. I mean, if you're into Formula One racing, you can perhaps correct me, but we can take things too far with Mercury opposition Jupiter. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for today. I was going to look at a few people who might be impacted by this opposition, but I think maybe I'll save that for later. I suppose I suppose we could, Elon Musk is so in the news at the moment that you probably want to. Elon Musk has got his Venus at 19 Gemini, so it may be that this. It somehow impacts him, and sort of what his Mercury opposition Jupiter. Maybe he'll be tempted to sort of maybe take things too far a little. He's having a good time, or so we're told. That would be Jupiter square his Venus. I think he's spending a lot of time with Trump, isn't he? And having fun in Florida. At least that's the impression I get. But that could just be Jupiter square his Venus, and now he's got Mercury square his Venus. So perhaps it's becoming all too much of a good thing for him at the moment. Another chart we might want to look at is Russia. Russia's chart. Here's Russia's chart. December 25th, 1991 is a time that can be used for Russia. So Russia has its Mars at 19 Sagittarius. So Mars for Russia would represent, I suppose, its armed forces, how it defends itself, and I suppose how it goes on the offensive. And so Mercury opposition Jupiter on Russia's Mars, this perhaps might give Russia the impetus to step things up. I was just looking at the news before I started this video, and there was a huge drone attack, rocket and drone attack on Ukraine, really unprecedented maybe. Russia is clearly trying to get this war done with, I think, and perhaps trying to knock out Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And so in terms of the Ukraine war, with this Mercury-Jupiter opposition, they may really want to take things to the next level almost, and perhaps they'll be tempted to sort of launch an offensive or something like that. But because it's Mercury opposition Jupiter, they may possibly take things too far. Remember that Roland Ratzinger had his Mars at 10 degrees Taurus, and the Mercury-Jupiter opposition was on his Mars. So, in a way, Russia has got the same Mercury-Jupiter hit to its Mars as Roland Ratzinger did. But on the other hand, maybe this is different because Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. But I think Russia is going to feel that it really needs to step things up with the Mercury-Jupiter opposition, hitting its Mars, which is, of course, a planet of war and aggression. Anyway, that's it for sure. So thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks very much for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.